Coming up, all the latest details on Jake Fromm's broken hand, including a discussion about whether injuries like this can be prevented. We'll talk about it all next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everybody and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad you're here. We hope you stayed safe over the 4th of July holiday, something that Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm was not able to do. We've obviously got a lot on that. I joked with my audience on Dog Nation Daily this morning when I closed the show on Tuesday. I said, y'all be safe on the 4th, and I meant that. Don't blow your house down with fireworks. Don't get into a boating accident. Don't get a fish hook stuck in your leg. Just try to stay safe. Jake Fromm, not exactly getting that part of the job done.
Yeah, and I hope everybody out there had a great 4th of July holiday.
Too.
I hope you had some sleep yesterday. I know that you're not a huge fireworks fan.
Yeah, I don't love the fireworks. Now, we saw some great fireworks with some friends last night, so I actually kind of got into this a little more than normal. It's the fireworks tonight that I can't stand.
Right.
I mean, listen, I'm somewhat libertarian on some things, various political persuasions on others. But when it comes to like fireworks, I'm like a stone cold socialist. Right. I don't want. I mean, people are going to be shooting these fireworks off for the next 5 days. I think they should all be thrown in jail. I think every single one of them should be thrown in jail. Yeah. Those are the families I want to separate. Right there.
4th of July. Yeah, it's definitely an adult holiday. I mean, it's like fireworks and booze and everything else going on. It's like it's scary for a lot of people. I think.
Yeah, no, listen, it is, and hopefully your structures are still standing. With that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into item number 1 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. It was a bit of a rough 4th of July week, I guess, for Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, who suffers an injury to a hand. DogNation.com has been all over the reporting on this. Let's tell you what we know about this, starting with Dog Nation's Chip Towers, who gives us the nature of the injury, the background behind it. Chip explaining here, as we'll show you, that this takes place on it's a small fracture of his left hand, non-throwing hand, sitting on the back of a boat while someone else wakeboarded on Lake Burton Tuesday. Lake Burton is a lake in like North Georgia. It's ironically the same lake that Nick Saban's house is on, right?
Yeah, Lake Burton.
So Lake Burton is a pretty swanky, nice lake here. That's where Fromm was. According to persons with direct knowledge of the incident, Chip writes, when the skier fell, let go of the rope, the handle flew back in the boat and hit Fromm on the left hand. Once again, that's good reporting from Dog Nation's Chip Towers. Now, Dog Nation's Jeff Sentell was also on this story, giving you some more details on just how serious, severe this injury was. Here's what Jeff was able to report on the injury. Jeff writes that Fromm's injury was described to Dog Nation as a fracture in his non-throwing hand, but it's being treated like a bone bruise. It'll not require a hard cast. Fromm is expected to proceed business as usual for the Bulldogs. Will still be doing all of his voluntary 7-on-7 work with his teammates. That's Dog Nation's Jeff Sentell. Now, when you read that, it makes it sound like, well, maybe all of this is maybe not too serious, not too much to worry about. That idea would seem to be confirmed by Georgia coach Kirby Smart, who did speak to Chris Lowe of ESPN. And apparently what Smart tells Lowe is, from his perspective, there's not a whole lot to worry about here either. Let me show you a couple of sentences from what Chris Lowe wrote at ESPN, which includes a quote from Kirby Smart. Lowe writes that he won't miss any summer workouts, Georgia coach Kirby Smart told ESPN on Wednesday. Smart termed the injury as, quote, insignificant, and said that Fromm already had resumed throwing. What do you make of all this? I mean, everything. Is this the kind of thing that Jake Fromm should be criticized for being on the boat? Is this the kind of thing from an injury standpoint you think Georgia fans have more to worry about than what Kirby Smart's indicating right here or what the Dog Nation reporting is indicating? I mean, you're a former player. You're a guy that spends a lot of time on the lake. Right. You're sort of a pretty interesting person to ask this stuff to. So just take this anywhere you want to go. What do you make of all
of this? I think first of all, and I've already been asked the question a couple of different times from people that are paying attention to what's going on, is that, Jake Fromm, shouldn't be on the lake, shouldn't be doing crazy. He was sitting on the back of a boat. This is not like he's doing some kind of X Games sport. He's not skateboarding. He's not riding a Harley down the road. He's on the back of the boat. I do think that there is a way to look at it and say, boy, this could have been a lot worse. If some rope's flying at him and hits his hand, it could have hit his face, could have done a lot of different things. But if I'm Jake Fromm, I'm not doing anything different. I'm a kid. I'm 19, 20, whatever he is at this point. He's a college student. He's trying to enjoy his summer. Go out there and have fun, kid. But let's hope things don't ever turn out to be that bad again. Another way that I looked at this too, and this is from a fan perspective, is Georgia's incredibly thin at quarterback. And this could have ended up being something that was a really bad deal for a team that really has their sights set on winning another SEC title and possibly getting back to another national title game. And I think that's something to keep your eye on as well if you're Kirby Smart. Listen, Kirby Smart comes out and said, not a big deal, he's back to throwing, but you got to think in the back of Kirby's head, he's going, like that could have been a very bad deal for our football team.
And I think that while the message here is, hey, everything's fine, he's already back throwing, he's already back participating in the voluntary 7-on-7s, you know, a lot of times with these injury stories, things have a way of changing over time. Remember, the immediate aftermath of Tua Tagovailoa's spring injury is it's a sprained thumb. Well, later on we found out it was a broken index finger. So sometimes, you know, much the same way in a criminal case, eyewitness accounts can be unreliable. Descriptions of injuries in the immediate aftermath of those injuries also sometimes have a way of being unreliable. Now, obviously, Georgia fans hope that doesn't end up being the case with Jake Fromm, but if you listen to the way that Dog Nation describes his injury, the way that Kirby Smart describes it, it's almost certainly a metacarpal injury. You have your carpals, you have your metacarpals, you have your phalanges, I believe these are called.
Hey, I got anatomy class going on.
I play a doctor on streaming video here. He's, as Jeff Centel reported at Dog Nation, wearing I think I call it a splint right now. But if it doesn't heal the way that it's supposed to, we may have a sort of an update to this diagnosis in a couple of weeks here. So for the people who say, well, it's just settled, this is the way it's going to be, I mean, these bones have to heal here, and there will be at least some interest in finding out how these bones heal and what is he wearing on his hand once Georgia practice begins in August. We've seen NFL quarterbacks wearing gloves on their non-throwing shoulders. We've seen, you know, some quarterbacks at the college level having to wear a cast on their non-throwing arms and hands. Hands is what I mean to say here. So, I mean, let's see how the medical diagnosis of this changes based on the way this broken or fractured hand heals.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to look at too is it's 4 to 6 weeks, right, until a bone heals in your hand. If he really is back to throwing, is this full speed? Is he, you know, is he fully competitive here on these 7-on-7 drills, or is this something where, hey, there's maybe a few more reps out there for Justin Fields, maybe a couple of more throws he gets in where Jake Fromm standing behind him and saying, hey, watch your read that way, watch your read that way. Any more reps for Justin Fields, I think, is a big storyline and a big deal at this point.
Because as a fan of Georgia, which I clearly am, it's one thing to say, oh, he's fine to throw the football, he's doing that this week. But what we have not heard is he taking snaps from center? Can he take snaps from center? Can he hand the ball off to a running back? And that's one of the first things you see in these early summer practices, those play polish drills where you're turning around and handing the ball to a running back. Can Fromm, with his broken hand the ball to a running back here? Can he take snaps from center? It would seem that's a little bit more difficult to do and could potentially hobble him in practice more than just his ability to throw the football, which is, you know, probably not hindered too much by a non-throwing hand.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think this ability to throw it is going to change anything, but it's the repetitions. It's the repetitions with wide receivers that could change. And those play-action plays that you are still doing in 7-on-7 because you still have a center, are you really feeling good about getting up under the center and putting your left hand up there and really getting that ball?
Honestly, that's a pretty intimate exchange for me anyway. I don't know that I would feel good about that under normal conditions.
Trust me, I've had somebody reach up under there. I've snapped balls before. It's not a good feeling on either end of that whole situation.
All right, let me deal with the other part of this real quick, and then I want to talk about Alabama here for a moment. The other issue is, and you've heard it, there's a knee-jerk reaction out there to say, well, he shouldn't be on the back of a boat anyway. He's the Georgia quarterback. He's got to get ready for the upcoming season. I just don't believe that kind of stuff at all. I think, and I said this on Dog Nation Daily this morning, I've got a son. Mike, one day you may have a son. You are a son, and at one point in time, you were a young son for your father. Here's the thing that all dads want for their kids. They want them to be active and having fun. They don't want their heads buried into these video games. And sort of, because honestly, you want to keep a kid safe and keep a kid free from injury, stick them in a basement or a closet and let them play video games all day long. They're not getting hurt, but they're not necessarily getting any better at life either. So whether it be, Sony Michel a couple years ago had the ATV accident. Jake Fromm has the boating accident here. Every team's got their own version of this kind of stuff. If it's not against the law, if it's not an obvious, reckless, moment, don't you sort of have to be a little bit hands-off on this and say, let kids, it's the week of the 4th of July, he's a good-looking 19, 20-year-old kid, let him have some time out there.
There's no doubt about it. It's like I said, he's not skydiving, right? I mean, he's not bungee jumping, he's not riding, listen, he's not even riding a four-wheeler, right? A lot of these things can be different. taken differently in the context of summer. He's sitting on the back of the boat. It's a freak accident. Things like that are going to happen. It just so happened to the starting quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs.
All right, so now speaking of the ATV, you mentioned four-wheelers. You know, back in the summer of 2016, Georgia running back Sony Michel, who would go on to great stardom at UGA, had his own version of a freak summer injury. He had an accident on an ATV, and Kirby Smart, in his first offseason as Georgia coach, was asked about that. As a little context for how Smart might feel about Fromm, let's listen to him not sounding too concerned about the nature of Sony Michel's injury from back in 2016. Take a listen to this.
Tough injury, tough for a kid who's worked so hard to be in the best shape of his life, but it's part of the game. It's part of things that happen, and kids have mistakes and things happen. So it's very unfortunate for him, but he's in good spirits now. He realizes that he's going to be healthy again. He'll be 100% again, so we're excited about it.
So that's Kirby Smart saying there that it's a part of the game, it's part of what you have to deal with. You could also add to that that it's just simply a part of life.
It is, and it's like I said, there's so many different things you could get mad about Jake Fromm about. Just sitting on the back of the boat and having a rope hitch in the hand is not one of them I'm going to be mad about. There's a million different things he could be doing wrong. He could be doing something that's against the law for all we know. It's just something that you can't be upset about.
Jeff Hogg on the Facebook comment section says Georgia averages 10 passes a game against cupcake teams. And you and I both said, now, I don't think this injury is going to prevent Fromm from being able to be full go come practice time, at least based on what we know about it right now. But I have said on this show before that people who think that the blueprint for the Georgia offense in 2017 is going to be duplicated in 2018, I think there's a very good chance Georgia throws the ball a whole lot more.
I do too, and they're going to have some athleticism in the wide receiver spot. They should have very good pass protection. It's going to be interesting to see, with some of these built-up leads like they could have at certain spots with the running game. It's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic changes.
Susan St. Pierre Williams says it's his left hand. It shouldn't be a big deal, and that's probably true. Although it is also worth pointing out here that Luke McCown, the New York Jets starting quarterback last season, late in the year broke his non-throwing hand, ended up missing the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's tough. And like I said, these things can go in so many different directions, and it's just one of those things you have to take each kind of thing and look at it under a microscope.
All right, let me get a couple more comments away here. We'll go to the YouTube comment section here just for a moment. Cliff Nelson says Fromm will be fine. Nothing to see here. Cliff, I'm sure celebrating day 4 of his birthday week. Hope he's still enjoying that. We'll hear a few more of the YouTube comments as they keep rolling in here on the program today. In fact, now let me move on to item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And speaking of quarterbacks, a quarterback that we've talked about a lot here on SEC Country Live before is Alabama quarterback Jalen Hurts. And some of the conversation about Hurts, I think, is sort of veered in the direction of being critical. Critical for how he played at times last season. Critical for the fact that he was not able to get Alabama over the hump in the national championship game at Georgia. Saban had to go to his bench and bring in Tua Tagovailoa. But it certainly seems, though, that at least some out there think that despite the criticism, there is still a way to view Jalen Hurts that he's underappreciated. Here's what one 24/7 sports writer wrote about that in the list of underappreciated players around college football. Jalen Hurts makes the list. Sam Hellman's the writer. What Sam says is, what has Jalen Hurts ever done except lead Alabama to back-to-back national title appearances, win the SEC Offensive Player of the Year as a true freshman? At any other program, Hurts would already have a statue. Even if Hurts never takes another snap at Alabama, which appears unlikely, he's one of the best college football players of the last 5 years and should be appreciated as such. That's Sam Hellman from 24/7 Sports. That seems like overpraise of Jalen Hurts for me. Certainly there are things to appreciate about Jalen Hurts, but I don't see any evidence of Jalen Hurts being underappreciated. I feel like the Alabama fans we hear from on this show every day are very thankful for what Hurts did give Alabama, but I don't think the majority or even really a significant pocket of Alabama fans hope that Hurts is the quarterback this year. I don't put Hurts in the category of being underappreciated.
This is a tough topic for me, too, because I've loved so many of the things that Jalen has done as an Alabama quarterback. I think it's interesting to look at, and here's the problem for me, and here's why I do kind of go along with the underappreciated talk. If Tua had never shown up, if this had been, say, Blake Barnett that showed up instead of Tua Tagovailoa, talking about 2 5-star quarterbacks, and Jalen's going into year 3 as a quarterback who's been to back-to-back national title games, don't know if he won either one of them, being in, circumstances. But if Jalen had been that guy and going into year 3 as a true junior, he has the ability to set every possible passing and rushing quarterback record at Alabama. And so I do look at it and say, boy, if Tua had not come along, you're talking about an all-time great quarterback in Alabama history. And it's just one of those things where all of a sudden somebody better has shown up.
I mean, to me, you're talking about a quarterback who gets to be on an all-time great team. I don't know that makes him an all-time great quarterback. And Matt Murrell in the YouTube comment section kind of talking the same thing. He says Hurts just looks scared to throw the ball into semi-coverage. He doesn't want to turn over. And if we talk about the thing that makes Jalen Hurts great, the thing that we hear come up over and over again from people is, hey, he doesn't turn the ball over, he protects the football. But for me, greatness is never going to be defined by what you don't do. Greatness is defined by what you do.
Right.
And for Jalen Hurts, yes, he avoids turnovers. What does he give you? What does he add to the mix here? Well, he's a great running quarterback, and that's fine. But as the Georgia game shows you the national championship, that only gets you so far. So I think that Hurts is probably one of the most fortunate quarterbacks in college football. He got to be a part of a team in which that he was going to be able to have great success. But you put him on a different SEC team, he is not leading that team to great success, which ought to be one of the hallmark definitions of a truly great quarterback, that he leads a program to success. He didn't lead Alabama to success. He rode the train of Alabama towards the success.
Well, I think that he's just a big piece of that blueprint, though. And I understand, listen, he's got passing limitations. I'll be the first one to tell you that Jalen Hurts has limitations as a passer. But if you know you have limitations as a passer, then of course you should pull that ball down and duck and run this thing and get as far as you can. And while it does have limitations and it can only take you so far, back-to-back years, Jalen Hurts took that train all the way to the national championship game, and so it's hard to argue with his game overall right now.
Lori Harold Kendall in the comment section says, hey, Jalen Hurts is appreciated. Tua is too. Either way, Alabama's going to be fine. And I think what I've said before here is I think up to a point Alabama would be fine with either quarterback, but I don't think you want any part of starting Jalen Hurts again against Auburn. I don't think you would want any part of starting Jalen Hurts again against Georgia in the SEC championship. So from that standpoint, Hurts doesn't really sort of meet the criteria for being underappreciated, because I think the right evaluation of Hurts is he can probably help you beat Ole Miss. He can probably help you beat Mississippi State. But if you want to beat Auburn, something you didn't do last year, and if you want to beat Georgia, something you weren't going to do if Hurts stayed in the game, at that point in time, Tua Tagovailoa is your only true option.
And that's really, been the talking point amongst Alabama fans and the coaching staff and whoever is how far can we really ride this thing? Can we really have a triple option style attack where Jalen Hurts throws the ball 8 or 10 times a game and is able to win some of these games? And truth be told, I've seen some bad performances from quarterbacks in national title games at Alabama that have won. And so I can't put it all on Jalen, but Tua definitely has more upside.
It is worth pointing out here, though, that Nick Saban many times has defended Jalen Hurts from criticism like the stuff that we've levied here, or at least that I've levied here at SEC Country Live and at other places. Saban has stuck by Hurts before. Even though he took him out of the national championship game, he has certainly seen a lot that he likes from his quarterback. Let me give you an example from just this past season, back in September. Here's Nick Saban coming to the defense of Jalen Hurts.
Well, I think a lot of things that you do are overblown, but I realize why you do it. It's your job to create news. It's our job to try to help our guys play winning football, and I think different players play winning football in different ways. So if you want to be critical of a guy for rushing for 154 yards and think he should not do that so he can pass more, then that's up to you.
Nick Miller in the Facebook comment section says a couple of the downsides on Tua Tagovailoa, it may not be durable and he doesn't have as much experience. Certainly Jalen Hurts, when you see him in person, he's a big physical presence. He's a stout player. Is that durability issue because Tua is just a little bit smaller? Is that the kind of thing that should be viewed as a reason to maybe play Jalen Hurts more?
I don't think so. And listen, you're always going to have issues with quarterbacks. Who knows when some of these quarterbacks are going to hurt? I mean, some of the best quarterbacks in the games have torn their knees up, torn their arms. It's going to happen. It's a football game. And so I think it's just up to a lot of these coaches to have the best situation behind some of these people, and that's something that Nick Saban has to look into.
Lawrence Robinson says, don't forget, Jalen Hurts also won the Mississippi State game last year. There was certainly a big touchdown throw in the late fourth quarter of that game. Devontae Smith caught that one too, right? Yeah. Am I right about that? I know this is going to come across like just total haterade. I do realize this. Devontae Smith won that game. He got single coverage, and he absolutely smoked a defensive back. Any quarterback in the SEC can make that throw. And I know that comes across as like just total haterade. And I have no beef or grudge against Jalen Hurts, but that's not some miraculous throw. A super talented wide receiver just took advantage of single coverage at that point.
I thought you were going to go a different direction. I thought you were going to say, listen, if Tua was starting the game at quarterback, they would have never been in the situation.
That may be true too.
To have to come back from 7 at the end of the game. Another comment I'm looking, paying attention to is on YouTube. Judah Alexander said Hurts should drop his ego and really look into playing running back. That's the one thing I will not knock back against. I think the reason so many people are in Jalen Hurts' corner is still being on Jalen's bandwagon is because he doesn't have an ego. Because the way he did react after the national championship game, I think that's why you hear quotes like that from Nick Saban where he's like, listen, this guy does a lot of good things and is a good leader.
How about your boy Bobo on there who says, BA, you are so right. It really is haterade. Maybe, listen, at least I acknowledge it.
Yeah.
But Jalen Hurts not the only one that could have made that throw in the fourth quarter against Mississippi State, at least I believe. You mentioned running backs. Let's talk about them for a moment. Item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. USA Today recently putting out its list of the top 10 running backs in all of college football. And when I look at this list, there is one thing that immediately jumps out to me: the shortage of running backs from the SEC.
Yeah.
Let me rattle through here from USA Today. Bryce Love from Stanford, Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin, David Montgomery from Iowa State, J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State, Justice Hill from Oklahoma State, Rodney Anderson from Oklahoma, Myles Gaskin from Washington, Devin Singletary from Florida Atlantic, Cam Akers from Florida State, and DeAndre Swift, the lone name from the SEC, hailing from Georgia. Now, let me give you my quick caveat to this as we dive into the conversation. I think it's totally ludicrous. I'm going to say this, though you don't have to. I think it's totally ludicrous that probably both Damian Harris and Najee Harris, the 2 Alabama running backs, aren't on this list. I think they deserve to be on here. Now, do you want to debate, should they be ranked ahead of DeAndre Swift? That's probably a debate worth having, and that may be interesting sort of in a different context. But for now, Harris should be on this list somewhere.
Right.
But how about the fact that nobody else from the SEC comes up on this list at all? Is this a down year for SEC running backs? Because we think of this as usually being a league that has Leonard Fournette, and Nick Chubb, and Derrick Henry at the same time. We think about multiple Heisman candidates coming from the SEC at the running back position. But, maybe Benny Snell from Kentucky is slided on a list like this. Maybe that's because he plays for Kentucky. But, there is no Raleigh Williams here. There is no, where are the good SEC running backs here this year? Because absent Georgia, Alabama, maybe Benny Snell from Kentucky, it seems like we're not talking a lot about these guys.
Yeah, no, I think it's a transition year, though. You know what I mean? Like, I look at this list and I break it down from top to bottom, and yes, I'm going to have my gripes. Yes, I think Damian Harris should be included on this list. Yes, I think DeAndre Swift. To me, DeAndre Swift is a perfect example of this list, though, because these are people, for the most part, that have already played. Now, I'm going to mention a bunch of names that I think could be on it at the end of the year. I think Travion Williams is going to be on it. I think you're probably going to look at Jordan Scarlett making a good push. Eris Williams, Larry Roundtree, Benny Snell, any of those guys I think could be on that list.
Well, Kentucky fans want you to mention Snell before you mention the rest.
Exactly.
I mean, Kentucky fans, I think, probably have a gripe to say, don't put Benny Snell in a group that includes Eris Williams.
Well, it's possible. And I think Mississippi State fans think Eris Williams is a pretty good player as well. I think every fan base has that guy. But I think LSU is a perfect example this year where it's a transitional year for running backs for the most part. I mean, Nick Chubb and Sony Michel leaving. You got Darius Geis leaving. A lot of the guys we have talked about for the last year and a half are no longer in this league. And so it's up to some of these other guys to step up.
Bo Molinari says, I know you guys don't look at Texas A&M, but Travion Williams is going to have a really good year. We just talked about him on Tuesday. You mentioned him right there. We talked about him on Tuesday. Christy Hardy, also in the Facebook comment section, says the list is bogus. And other than sort of the absence of SEC names, I have to admit that there is something pretty bogus, I think, about the list. Would it be possible to show the list one more time here? Because there is sort of an issue that I have with this just a little bit. When you look at like what you think of as great running backs, now I'm going to give you Cam Akers. Cam Akers can start for any team in the SEC. He'd start for Alabama. Cam Akers is a really good running back. I've got no problem with Rodney Anderson. I saw him up close and personal in the Rose Bowl. That's a good player. J.K. Dobbins, Ohio State, that's also a good player. But here's some of the other stuff that I have issue with here. Take David Montgomery for a second. Take Justice Hill for a second. Take Devin Singletary for a second here. To me, here's what a good running back is. It is somebody that when it's 3rd and 1, the game's on the line, they can get that yard.
Right.
3rd and 4, the game's on the line, they can get that yard. Are you telling me that Justice Hill to Oklahoma State is the kind of guy that's going to churn out 4 big, tough yards for you when everybody in the building knows he's getting the football there? I mean, we're going to see this with the kid from Washington. What's his name? Myles Gaskin?
Myles Gaskin.
Everybody treated it as national news when Myles Gaskin came back to Washington. He makes the Huskies a playoff contender, so the national media would let you know. Well, you know what? In Atlanta, in what's probably going to be a close game, in the 4th quarter, he's got Derek Brown and Dontavius Russell and Marcavius Bryant and all those guys from Auburn lining up the line of scrimmage to stop him when they know he's getting the football. Yeah. Is Myles Gaskin going to get tough yards against a good defensive line when they are expecting a running play, or is this one of those deals where a lot of these teams west of the Mississippi are just compiling stats because the defenses are spread so far out wide because they're throwing the ball 90 times a game.
Yeah, no, and it's like I said, I like some of these names on the list. First of all, I think Jonathan Taylor's a good running back, the Wisconsin guy. I do like Bryce Love out of Stanford. I think he's a good running back as well. But I do have to point to Bradley Fales' comment in the YouTube comment section. And I brought this up to you a couple of times over the last 2 weeks. He says the rest of the country just has SEC fatigue, where they're not looking at some of these guys as close as they possibly can. And I can even narrow that down to Damian Harris. Listen, we talked about Athlon's, on Roll Tide Daily, we talked about Athlon's list of top running back groups, top running back rooms. Bama was #1 running back room. So all of a sudden now none of their guys can get on the top 10 list from USA Today. I think there is some of that behind it. Whether anybody would admit it or not, I think the rest of the country and ESPN and USA Today do have a little bit of SEC fatigue.
98 Sports Talk says, along with your comment, in other words, it's definitely not a down year for SEC running backs. They just aren't getting any love right now. If you're a Florida fan, you hope that's true. You hope it's not one of those deals where, hey, you've got a guy that's a candidate to break out in Jordan Scarlett, but it just doesn't happen because he's only an average running back. And, the same thing for Travion Williams at Texas A&M, who we joked with some of our A&M viewers. You and I think both think is a pretty good player. But if you're an Aggies fan, you hope that really is the case, that he can be kind of a focal point of an offense this season. It's not one of those deals where somebody has to start for A&M, so it might as well be him. Same thing for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know that Cliff Nelson on YouTube a moment ago was talking about him as a break at LSU running back. Is this a case where he just emerges as a starter because of default, or is this a case where he really is the next in a Darius Geis, Leonard Fournette type of deal here? I will admit here, while I think that your notion of SEC fatigue, or maybe in some cases just sort of a bias in favor of the robust stats that some of these spread teams put up, there's also a real concern, I think, for a lot of these SEC teams. Cam Akers at Arkansas. Not Cam Akers. Devwah Whaley at Arkansas. Sort of a down, disappointing sophomore season. I think there is a legitimate concern for some of these SEC teams that they don't have a featured back. They got a guy that's going to start, but just because you start doesn't mean you're a featured back.
Well, no, I agree with that. And listen, we can go round and round about different brands of football, and the fact of the matter is, when you look at some of these guys, they benefit off playing off some of these wide open styles of football. They just do. You mentioned Justice Hill. I can look at Rodney Anderson. The list goes on of some of these guys that benefit and playing in different leagues. Myles Gaskin's another one of those guys playing Pac-12 football. You're just not going to see it the way you do. And you mentioned, hey, 3rd and 1 is where you find out about good running backs. Those teams aren't even taking handoffs from under center on 3rd and 1. You know what I mean? They're back in the shotgun. They're spreading it out. They're making their splits on the offensive line 4 yards wide. And it's just a different brand. So a lot of these guys' stats do tend to pop up. And maybe that's where I come up with the SEC fatigue kind of notion. Maybe the SEC brand of football is just boring to some of these national
I'm going to tell you right now, I could not pick Oklahoma State running back Justice Hill out of a lineup, and I hope I never know.
No.
Because to me, in comparison to the kind of running backs that go into big-time stardom in the NFL, he is completely inconsequential. Look at the recent draft success of the Big 12. That tells you everything you know about Justice Hill. Cool name, but not one of the 10 best running backs.
He plays in a Mike Gundy offense. These guys are going to pile up statistics, and the same goes for and Bama's kind of the same way. You're going to have a lot of rushing statistics at Bama. Same goes for Wisconsin and some of these other teams.
All right, let me do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. So some interesting things going on with Tennessee at one position here in particular, and I think if you're a VOLS fan, this is something pretty exciting. Let me start with a name we've talked about a lot here before on SEC Country Live before. That's the 2019 offensive tackle commit from suburban Atlanta, Wanye Morris. Now, Morris has been this past week at the opening, the big recruiting event of the summer that takes place this year in Frisco, Texas. And as Dog Nation's Jeff Sintel explains in what is admittedly a pretty short clip here, that Morris really showed out, won most of his reps there this week. In fact, here's the pretty high praise that Jeff gave to Wanye Morris.
You've got Wanye Morris, the talented offensive tackle from Grayson. He looks like, to me, the #1 tackle in the country most of the time.
So that's Jeff Sintel, a Georgia recruiting reporter. He let me try that one more time. He reports about Georgia recruiting, but a guy that's committed to Tennessee, Wanye Morris, Jeff calls the #1 offensive tackle right now in the entire country based on the way that he performed at the opening this week. So that's a check in the box here for 2019. The Vols also now in the finalist group for a 2020 offensive tackle here as well. Bryn Tucker making it official. He's going to include Tennessee along with Auburn, Notre Dame, LSU, and Virginia Tech in his final group here. Tucker, another one of these examples of what there have been a lot of lately, elite offensive tackles from the town of Knoxville. It was Trey Smith a couple years ago. It was Cade Mays that the Vols missed out on in 2018. It's Bryn Tucker here for the class of 2020. When you look at what may be an inside track for Tennessee with Bryn Tucker, the success that Wanya Morris is having on the summer circuit here, already kind of in the fold for the class of 2019 for Tennessee, all of a sudden you see some examples of maybe Jeremy Pruitt's going to get it right in an area where Butch Jones kind of got it wrong. Jones' miss on Cade Mays was high profile, and the turmoil that led Mays to go to Georgia was an ugly miss for the Vols here. It looks like Jeremy Pruitt's on his way to correcting that a bit, or at least he has a great chance to.
No, and I think that's his blueprint. I think that's what Jeremy Pruitt went into Knoxville trying to do. And is it too early in Jeremy Pruitt's, kind of term there at Tennessee to call this a must-get? Like, is it too early to start turning that corner on some of the things Jeremy Pruitt's trying to do and just say, hey, listen, this kid is a must-get for Jeremy Pruitt right now?
Yeah.
I know that it's year number 1, and this is the first year he's really spent recruiting full-time and being able to get his guys. But I look at a guy like Brent Tucker, and I would have felt like this Cade Mays had it come 1 year earlier, that these guys are just must-gets for Jeremy Pruitt. He's talked about locking down Memphis. He's talked about locking down Chattanooga, Nashville, whatever it may be. How about we lock down Knoxville? How about we start getting these really highly thought-of players out of Knoxville? And I think this guy's next on the list. I think you start adding that together with Wanya Morris, like you were kind of saying a minute ago. All of a sudden, Jeremy Pruitt's brand of football that he wants to kind of implement there at Tennessee becomes a lot easier with the talent he's bringing in.
And I think that last word you used there is what's so important here. Just having a good offensive line, or even better than average offensive line, just makes things easier. It's easier to go out and get quarterbacks and running backs and wide receivers. Yeah. It's easier to sort of cobble together some sensible play calling. Everything is just easier when you trust the 5 guys blocking up front. It's when you have to start putting together, mismatched pieces of offensive linemen you don't really trust. All of a sudden, you're not calling the plays you want to call. All of a sudden, you can't look a running back in the eye and say, come here, we're going to get you in the NFL.
Yeah.
You don't know if the offensive line is going to be able to block for him, and those running backs and skill position players can smell that a mile away. Everything is easier on the offensive side of the ball if you can get the offensive line part of this right.
No doubt. And listen, when Wanya Morris came on here and we were on here watching his commitment and he committed to Tennessee and you're watching his film, I knew he was incredible. I was like looking at this guy going, this is a 5-star offensive tackle if I've ever seen one. And his words, I think, rang hollow to some people that day. Some Tennessee fans, some other fans, when he was like, you know what, I want to be the cornerstone. I want to be something this class can hang its hat on. I'm going to start recruiting to Tennessee. Well, now all of a sudden he's a 5-star tackle. And now all of a sudden you hear Jeff Sentell saying, hey, listen, this guy might be the best offensive tackle in the class. All of a sudden that anchors a little bit more. And all of a sudden that recruiting does start coming a little bit easier when guys like Wanya Morris are in your corner.
Perry Williams says, everyone's sleeping on the Vols, but we ain't got nothing to lose. We're going to show up and give some elites trouble, and it's going to be scary. Now, Greg Steele, a Florida fan, says, good luck with that, Perry. But that's clearly a Tennessee fan who says not only is there excitement for the 2019 class and the 2020 class, there may be an opportunity to get some of this right with the 2018 season here as well.
Yeah, that one's a little bit more far-fetched for me. I mean, listen, I love Jeremy Pruitt.
Why are you crushing dreams on the day after the 4th of July?
What is it? What do we have it at? 6.5, the over-under? I mean...
Oh, I don't think they're winning 6.5 games.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's just... you're going to point at me for crushing it and say, I don't think they're
supposed to be the nice guy.
No, I'm not. I'm the offensive line guy.
I'm the guy that plays heel.
I'm the offensive line guy that knows what they have on talent right now up front, and it's not very good. So unless they can get things turned around in short order with Will Friend up there in Knoxville...
Well, let me ask you a serious question here, and this is in all sincerity. A, I think that Will Friend's a pretty good offensive line coach. I think he showed that when he was at Georgia. And B, there's this. Some of the guys online that sort of write about the X and O's part of football will say that offensive line should not be judged as 5 individual parts. They should be judged as a collective unit, how they play together. So if Trey Smith is back healthy, and every indication from Jeremy Pruitt right now is he will be, how much can one player raise the fortunes of the other 4? Because pretty clearly, there's only one offensive lineman I believe that Tennessee currently has that everybody else would want. That's Trey Smith, and Smith is likely a starter for every team in the SEC. Yep. How much could he make the other 4 better? How much does his presence lift the boats that are underneath that tie?
Well, it depends. It depends on how many repetitions he's getting. If you're getting a Trey Smith that all of a sudden shows up in week 1 and says, hey, I'm healthy, I'm here, then that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing for Tennessee because they're not getting a chance to really work him into this rotation. But I watched the spring game. I was impressed with what Will Friend did. I just think there's some athletic limitations that he's having to work with. And you haven't seen it for a few years. Tennessee Vol fans will be the first one to tell you, listen, they've had so many injuries. Literally, I mean, maybe for the past 10 years on Tennessee's offensive line, it seems like every time you see them. When we played them in 2009, they were starting two walk-ons at the guard spots against Terrence Cody, which you know how that ended. And it's a scary thing for Tennessee fans. Obviously, Trey Smith makes them better, but they all have to work together too, and that's up to Will Friend.
I like Perry Williams' comment. He says, "Hey, y'all, don't get too far ahead of me now. I'm talking about in the future, not necessarily this year. Slow down, BA and Mike." All right, Perry, that's well taken. That's good stuff
point.
there.
Good point, Perry.
However, let me find this comment from Cody Rosenblum here, who kind of takes a different tack, who says, nobody's paying attention to the Vols. This is Cody Rosenbaum on Facebook. Nobody's paying attention to the Vols, but Pruitt's building in secret. Wait and watch. So Cody says he really does feel like he sees something taking place in Knoxville right now.
Yeah, no, it's pointed in the right direction.
Sorry, Mike's such a hater.
Listen, if you're a Tennessee fan and you're looking for good news and looking for something to compare it to, and we've talked about this a ton, who's going to hit the ground running faster, Jeremy Pruitt or Dan Mullen? Right now, it's Jeremy Pruitt, and there's no debating that at all.
Tim Schmoker says it's Arkansas right now. That's the sleeper dark horse team. Gonna happen at least 7, most likely 8 wins. That's a really provocative comment from Tim Schmoker there, and that is and I mean this. We have a lot of Arkansas fans who watch this show every day, but that's the most optimistic assessment I've heard of Arkansas all season long.
No, I think that is too, and it's not like I'm not that far down on Arkansas. I think they have some pieces. But I don't know. I don't know what Chad Morris is going to be able to do with those offensive pieces right now. I think there's a lot of different work. They've got a couple of talented wide receivers, but their offensive line has been a mess.
So you think they've got some offensive pieces?
I think
what I want
they
you
could.
to do. I'm going to give you this sheet of paper. I'm going to give you this pen. I want you to write these offensive pieces down.
Yeah, it's going to be a true freshman quarterback, and it's going to be I don't think either one of the guys they had in the spring playing quarterback. I don't think either one of them see the field this year.
Yeah, maybe not. All right, let's do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list, and it feels like we've been talking about this too much. If you're a Florida fan, a guy from the Sunshine States who's getting away here. Now, for Florida, they feel like they've lost a couple of recruits to Florida State as of late, but here's one that gets all the way out of the South. I'm talking about 4-star wide receiver John Dunmore. At one point in time, a Florida commit. You have to go back to the early winter on that. He's been decommitted now for a long time. The SEC school he's been most recently connected to is probably Auburn. He's taken a couple visits here to the Plains as of late, but when he made his announcement on the 4th of July, he chose Penn State. Here is his Twitter tweet that makes it official, done deal. #WeAre. You see Dunmore there supporting the blue and white colors. And this is a James Franklin program at Penn State that was in the top 10 a year ago, doing nice things here for the class of 2019 as well. So this is partially a story about James Franklin becoming somewhat of a force to be taken seriously when it comes to Penn State recruiting. It's an issue of, hey, Auburn thought they had a chance here, but ultimately Penn State wins out. But what in the world is Florida doing letting a former commit go all the way up to Penn State?
And it sounds, honestly, at this point, we've brought this up a few times in the last couple of weeks on here about Florida recruiting, and it sounds like we're beating a dead horse, and it sounds like we're really riding Dan Mullen and expecting too much. But it's not. I mean, it's become a head scratcher. And not only did they lose out on a highly thought of recruit from Hollywood, Florida to Penn State, but this guy would have been a mile away the best recruit in their class had they been able to land him. And so that kind of really highlights 2 specific areas that become really concerning for Florida fans.
My favorite comment of the week may come from Quentin Flanders here on Facebook, who's a Florida fan. We had a Tennessee fan a moment ago said he thought that Jeremy Pruitt was building something in secret there at Tennessee. Quentin Flanders says, I'm praying that Dan Mullen's building in secret at Florida. Otherwise, there may not be anything going on there. That's a great comment from Quentin Flanders.
Good.
And here's one of these things where, even though this is somewhat negative in terms of the assessment and the evaluation of Florida, the feedback that I'm getting from the Gators fans who watch this show every day is this is what they want to hear more of. They do want Mullen's feet to be held to the fire of, you cannot coach up 3 stars in Gainesville. You've got to bring in the elite talent, like the Dunmores and the people like that who, for the moment, Derek Hunter we spoke about the other day on the defensive side of the ball. Guys who are currently going elsewhere. You can't coach up another version of that who's from like the sort of the plucky 2- and 3-star ranks. You've got to bring in elite talent. It's the Florida fans who want this set right now.
And I agree. And here's the thing, too. When you look at it, this highlights the fact that Dan Mullen has to win this year. I mean, he really does. You're going to be without Martez Ivey and C.C. Jefferson and Jordan Scarlett and whoever else in the years to come. And when Dan Mullen was hired at Florida, what were we told? Boy, you see what he did at Mississippi State. Imagine what he can do with Florida's talent. Imagine what he can do with Florida's recruiting base. That's what we were told. That's what we expected. That's why I thought it was a good hire. Well, what all of a sudden if he doesn't have Florida's talent? What all of a sudden if he doesn't have Florida's recruiting base? What if all those things are not in his corner and you're stuck with a Mississippi State, kind of style of program that's up and down, 6, 7, 8 wins? It's not going to be good enough down there.
We got to pick up the pace here a little bit. Let me do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I want to talk more about something we talked about when we last were with you on Tuesday. those somewhat controversial comments by Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley about Georgia would not be a top 5 defense if it played in the Big 12 every year. A lot of people have had a reaction to that. Mike and I had our reaction to this on the air here with you. Some of this continues on social media, including former Georgia star turned ESPN analyst David Pollack, who had this to say about what Lincoln Riley had to say. Let me show you the tweet from Pollack here, who says, I think Lincoln Riley is correct with his comments. I don't think Georgia would be a top 5 defense in college football if they played in the Big 12, but I think they would easily be the best defense in the Big 12, though. So Pollack taking a somewhat political tact here, sort of arguing almost both sides of this same issue. Other people have taken sort of a backlash to the backlash. The people who've kind of come down hard on Lincoln Riley, other people are saying, hey, you got to understand the full context of what Riley said. He didn't just say that Georgia wouldn't be a top 5 defense if it played in the Big 12. He said a lot of other stuff as well. Well, to sort of set that up right now, let me let you hear from ESPNU Radio on Sirius XM, the full answer that Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley gave about Georgia. The question's not even about Georgia. He just sort of pivots to Georgia. About the nature of Big 12 football, what makes it so different. Do SEC fans feel different now that they hear the full answer from Lincoln Riley? Let's listen and decide.
You know, what's different here is you're facing those offenses every single week. You just don't have that in any other league. Not that you don't have good offense in other leagues, of course you do, but you just don't have the consistency and just the challenge week in and week out that you do in this league. I mean, the Rose Bowl is a perfect example. Nobody all year could move the ball on Georgia, and you know we had a pretty nice run in that game offensively. And you've seen that in a lot of the, you know, a lot of people had trouble moving the ball against Ohio State last year. You know, I mean, you've seen that a lot in these non-conference games, these matchups where all of a sudden these really good defenses are giving up, that everybody thinks or this or that, are giving up a lot of points to Big 12 teams. So it is a challenge. We did have some excellent defenses in this league last year. You know, Iowa State, TCU, some of those guys were some of the top-ranked defenses, no doubt. But you go throw Georgia's defense, which was a top 5 ranked defense going into the Rose Bowl, you go throw them in the Big 12 every year, they're not going to be a top 5 defense. I mean, it's just probably not going to happen. And so, you know, the challenges that you face, the style of offenses that you face is definitely a little bit different. But again, I think it's league-wise, again, if you watch kind of where the NFL's headed and kind of where our league's been, I think it's very, very close, very similar to so many of those teams. And I think there's a lot of teams in this league that are on the rise too. So it's an exciting time for our conference.
So maybe this puts me in the minority, but I don't think that hearing the full answer from Lincoln Riley does anything to change the argument on a number of fronts here. First of all, listen to his answer about, in the middle of talking about, you know, how tough the Big 12 is, he essentially pivots towards, and our offense scored a lot of points against Georgia. He says we had a nice run against Georgia. By nice run, he means mostly in the first half.
Right.
He had a good first half of scoring in a game that they eventually lost. I'm sorry, that is a welterweight comment. That's the kind of thing that would get stomped a mud hole on if it were said by an SEC coach. You can't get away with that stuff down here. And Lincoln Riley can give himself a participation trophy for scoring points in the first half against Georgia, which is exactly what those comments about Georgia sound like. But that stuff is just not going to fly down here. And the reaction to the comments from the sort of national media and the Oklahoma people who are sort of confused why SEC fans are upset about this, I think it just speaks to the great divide that exists about the way these different factions, the sort of west of the Mississippi folks and the folks down here in the South, are just different people who sort of sometimes look at things different ways. And this is a sort of a litmus test for how different groups of people just view football differently. And I don't think the full context of Lincoln Riley's answer changes much.
No, it doesn't for me either. And it was one of those things where I put out a tweet yesterday or 2 days ago, and I was like, Danny Cannell was the one that was, doing this show. He was like hosting. He could have led him into this. He went to the Georgia route by himself. And the argument I made to some of the Big 12 people on Twitter today was, can you imagine after Vanderbilt held Kansas State to 7 points? Vanderbilt held Kansas State to like 78 yards passing in that game, which Kansas State, by the way, was like the 3rd or 4th ranked team in the Big 12 this year. Vandy holds them to that. Can you imagine Derek Mason coming out and saying, well, Kansas State's okay, but if they played in the SEC every week, they wouldn't be as good as people think they are. These Big 12 offenses are just people would fall apart. The Big 12 would absolutely fall apart over. And so it becomes that much more of a head scratcher for me to people to look at and say, oh, why are you offended over that? Lincoln Riley should keep his mouth shut and focus on what he can focus on. That's the biggest problem for me is why are you talking about this?
And this is one of those things where like the real issue, and I think we said this on Tuesday, but I want to just briefly mention it again. The real issue is what's underneath the surface here. This is not Georgia fans arguing with Lincoln Riley. This is Big 12 coach who thinks he's smarter than everybody in the room trying to pitch to recruits when they should come to the Big 12.
Well, the NFL's doing all the things we're doing right now. I mean, you heard that in his voice. I was sitting there going, listen, man, Lincoln Riley's barely older than me. I have a hard time believing, the NFL is really focused on what Lincoln Riley's doing.
Let me give you some context here. Do you remember when Texas Tech played Arkansas and Cliff Kingsbury, the Texas Tech coach, went in on Brett Bielema?
Yeah.
Brett Bielema represents sort of a traditional SEC style, even though he's kind of from the Big Ten, but he has fullbacks, he has power football, and, Kingsbury doesn't like a lot of that, I don't think like Brett Bielema. Remember when Sheldon Richardson from Missouri talked about Georgia being old man football? I mean, there is this thing of the SEC people just think they're tougher than the Big 12, and the Big 12 folks just think they're smarter than the SEC.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what this comes down to. What's better, being tough or being smart? I mean, that's ultimately what all this sort of is about here.
And that's the outlook. That's not even, facts in reality. That's not even what the reality is that Lincoln Riley all of a sudden thinks he reinvented football, and he's talking about, how NFL teams are starting to do some of these things, and really they expose Georgia's. What he sounded like he was saying to me, but we really expose some of these SEC defenses. And that's not the strength to me of the SEC. It's trying to do it week in and week out to teams that are fully prepared for you.
We have got to move here, but let me take a few comments here. Al Labard says Riley is hallucinating. The Big 12's never had any defense. Perry Williams says, come play for the offense that almost beat Georgia. Furthermore, the SEC always ends with SEC counter recruiting there on that. Counter recruiting to other conferences, and that's what a lot of this comes down to. I think Perry's right. Some counter recruiting. James Crump on Facebook says you do not face good defenses week in and week out in the Big 12. Not that there are not good defenses in the Big 12. Place Oklahoma in the SEC, and they're not a top 5 offense nationally. Maybe 1 or 2 games they go off for 50, but they would barely average 30 points. And obviously, it's true. If you want to measure things by the traditional old school stats of total yards and total points, then things would be different for Georgia somewhat in the Big 12, and things would be different somewhat for Oklahoma in the SEC. Ultimately, that's not the best way to measure defenses, though. It's more about what you do on a per-play basis. And I think Georgia and Alabama and some of these elite teams from the SEC, even against top-flight offenses week in and week out, would do just fine. They'd give up more yards and more points, but that really good defense with that truly elite talent is going to lead to a lot of victories.
Well, and people call it old man football, but SEC football is like that for a reason. It's a game of keep away, right? It's not, boy, let's see how many times we could snap the ball and let's throw the ball 60 yards down the field. It's, hey, let's put together a nice 8, 9, 10-minute drive on offense. Let's grind it down their throat, and then let's see how they respond on offense. Maybe they'll go 3 and out because they're trying to drop back every play and pass the ball around. It drives me crazy. I think Malachi Morgan has a good comment, too, in the Facebook comment section. And if OU played in the SEC, they wouldn't lead the country in total offense either. One game isn't a definitive assessment. And I went off about this on Twitter. Why are we talking about this after one game? Lincoln Riley has coached one game against an SEC defense. The Oklahoma fans, why are you so upset over one comment about one game? It's because this comes from the Bob Stoops era of talking about SEC opponents where it's, boy, we're really good until you get to games that matter and you start losing. And I don't want to hear it after that.
Lincoln Nail on the YouTube comment section says, I mentioned Brett Bielema a moment ago. He says, I wanted Bielema to do well, but he just couldn't make it happen. It's all well, though, as I think more is going to be really good for my Hogs. And Lincoln may know this better than me because he's an Arkansas fan. But I think ultimately Brett Bielema, who is forced to recruit in Texas because of geography, I think he was sort of the lone wolf trying to sort of make a case for old football, and I mean old style football, traditional football, when everybody else had fallen in love with those spread concepts and shotgun sets and pillow fight, 7-on-7, two-hand touch football. And I think that Bielema had a legitimate rivalry with a lot of those Texas college coaches, and frankly rubbed a lot of high school coaches the wrong way because he was telling them in so many words, your way of doing the sport's just wrong.
Yeah, no, and this is a topic, and this is something I could go on about for 10 years, and obviously we've got to pivot at some point to going on to the next talking point on the show, but drives me absolutely crazy that and listen, I got all these comments about being a Southerner and about being listen, I don't care. What's happening in the SEC is the right way to play football. I don't care.
Let us do item number 7 here in our SEC Country Live First in 10 list, and maybe a real strength emerging here for Florida. I think there are 2 things we can say about the Gators. One thing is we know their defensive line is probably going to be pretty good. We've talked about that. Also, maybe a reason to think that the wide receiver core are going to be pretty good here as well. We've talked up Tyree Cleveland. I know you're really excited about the transfer of Van Jefferson. Another name to think about here is Joshua Hammond, who also shows up on that 24/7 sports list of potentially underappreciated players in college football this year. The writer makes a compelling case for Hammond. Let me show you what he had to say. This is, once again, Sam Hellman from 24/7 Sports. Joshua Hammond, he says, played more snaps than any other wideout on the roster last season, and with the amount of excitement and hope surrounding Van Jefferson and his move from Ole Miss to Gainesville, not let Hammond and his experience be overlooked. He's got 32 catches and 432 career yards, but should be in for a bigger season with Dan Mullen. So if that's true for Joshua Hammond, who I'll admit I just sort of thought of as sort of just a guy a year ago. I didn't think of him as necessarily a star player, but he's on the field a lot and he had some catches. Maybe he has more this season. Let's say that he does. Add that to Van Jefferson. Add that to Jacob Copeland, who showed up on campus and now is going to be ready to go for his freshman season. Tyree Cleveland, who I do think is really good. All of a sudden, that seems like a pretty good Florida wide receiving core.
Listen, and Trevon Grimes, who could possibly get his things in order, the Ohio State transfer, and you're not even talking about Kadarius Toney, who is a do-it-all weapon.
That's a really good point.
Really
good point.
We can talk about Josh Hammond, and I think Josh Hammond's a very good player, but I have a hard time moving Josh Hammond in my mind past that utility kind of role player. I really do, and that's no disrespect to him, but that offensive line, I mean, that wide receiver group down at Florida could be really, really special. When you put all those names together, and you mentioned Jacob Copeland, the freshman, and you put together a couple of those transfers and other players that have been within the program, to me, Josh Hammond is a good player, but he's going to be lucky to crack the top 5, in my opinion.
I guess my question would be, when you think about the depth of that wide receiving core there is, these are guys that are going to line up a long way away from the ball.
Yep.
The farther you are from the ball, sometimes the tougher it is for you to make an impact on the game. Can the wide receivers from Florida propel the entire offensive unit to success? I mean, because really that should be done by your quarterback, and if it can't be done by your quarterback, you hope it's done by your running back, and you probably hope it's your offensive line more than anything else.
Right, yeah.
The Florida offensive line may be okay, but if we're bragging on the receivers, can being led by a receiving core work for an offense?
I think it could. I think definitely, given Dan Mullen's ability to kind of go to the strength of what his offense can be, the hard thing for me is that who's going to be the quarterback, right? That's really what we're asking. If we're asking who's going to be the quarterback and who's going to be able to get it to these guys, I think that's really, really going to be the issue as far as Florida. I don't have any doubt they have a talented wide receiver core. Who's going to get them the ball is the biggest question right now.
All right, item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Holiday commitments are sort of a thing that happens the week of a major holiday, whether it be Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, sometimes 4th of July. You see programs add major prospects. Alabama proving that true once again here this week as they add big-time 4-star defensive tackle Byron Young from out of the state of Mississippi. Here is Young's way of making that official on social media with the Notes app, the way that so many guys do. He announces how proud he is to be a part of Alabama's class of 2019. I think that Young's a really good player, Mike. But my story here on this is one of the things that I think was unknown about the changeover that Alabama had with its coaching staff was how Craig Kuligowski was going to fit into a program that's all about recruiting. I don't know that Kuligowski had been asked to be that guy in his coaching past. Had been a great defensive line coach at Missouri. At Miami, that's a place they're doing a lot of very local recruiting, and maybe you don't have to quite have those those full contact chops worked out. But Alabama, you absolutely do. In Alabama, you've got to be an A+ recruiter to stay on the job. Kuligowski had not really proven himself to be that before. But man, he's really racking up on the recruiting trail right now. When you think about Jason Jones for 2020, when you think about Byron Young here for 2019, they're the names that Alabama has added here. Kuligowski, I think, as a recruiter, has been a real pleasant surprise for Alabama, if I were to say.
Yeah, I know. I'm so glad you said that. First of all, I'll bring you on a secret. Me and BA don't talk about these topics before the show starts. We just don't. We do.
Our show meeting is 4 seconds long.
We don't talk about the topics before we get on here. The number one thing I have under this, recruited by Kuligowski. Okay, nice. And that's the biggest story to me. And obviously, Bama, continues to roll on recruiting trail. I think this is number 120 player ranked in the country. You expect him to do good things. But the fact that Kuligowski is the guy that's gotten him on board, the fact that Kuligowski was really the only guy that was not hired because of recruiting prowess. Everybody else was hired because of recruiting prowess. Kuligowski because he's a good D-line coach.
Right, and some context here, because I know that's not a super famous name. It's a pretty strong consensus that he may be the best on-field defensive line coach in the entire country.
Yes.
That most of the time we say good position coach, we're really talking about good recruiter. Kuligowski is one of those guys that really does have a strong reputation for what he does as an on-field coach. So Alabama may be getting the best of both worlds.
No, yeah, that's going to be the biggest point to kind of follow in what this new Bama coaching staff is able to do. Obviously, recruiting very well right now, but the fact that Kuligowski keeps showing up in a lot of these situations where they're getting commitments is a huge thing for
Jeremy
Bama.
Pettis likes what he says. He gives the fire emoji for the Alabama recruiting on the year 2019 there. That's certainly something that's getting him excited there. So a lot of Alabama fans feeling very good about what's going on with the state of their recruiting right now. Let's do item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And you know, one of the things that Tennessee's been doing so far this offseason is releasing these little snippets of video of each of their coaches speaking to the team. And in most cases, what we hear is pretty passionate. Most cases, what we hear is very personal and very heartfelt. And we hear from Tennessee defensive back coach Terry Fair here, who is a Vol legacy in his own right as a player, and in the midst of speaking to the current team, discusses what made him want to come to Tennessee in the first place. And I have to say that it sort of feels like there may be a bit of a hidden message in what Terry Fair has to say here. Watch this little video, and then we'll talk about what I think the takeaway is supposed to be from the people who put this video out. Here's Tennessee.
Today, I'll be talking about what does the team mean to you? What does this game mean to you? All right, and for some of you guys, you're going to find out quickly that it means a whole lot more than what you really think. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. Long way from home, almost 2,000 miles away from home. What brought me to Tennessee? All right, one, the pride, the tradition. All right, came on my visit, the guys that I was with on my visit, the players that I encountered, I felt that this was the best place for me to come and grow in 4 years into what I wanted to become. All right, not to mention that we're going to play in some big-time football games, play in the best conference in college football. All right, it was the orange, it was the power tee, it was the checkerboards. All right, it's how I was treated. Toughness, pride.
So that's good stuff there from Terry Fair, the Tennessee defensive backs coach, talking about coming from Arizona to Tennessee. And Mike, I can't help but think that's the message that the people who make these videos, and
right,
the initial idea from Jeremy Pruitt about the whole concept probably, that was the purpose of this one, to talk to those other guys from other states outside the SEC footprint. Because how many times have we heard, if you're Tennessee, you got to recruit nationally. Right. If you're Tennessee, you got to be out there and be more than just SEC states. You got to be all over the place here. And to show a guy like Terry Fair, who did have good success with the VOLS as a player, who's now back as a Tennessee coach here, to hear him say, hey, I recognize the history, the tradition, the pageantry of Tennessee from 3,000 miles away. That's a message that Jeremy Pruitt is trying to craft, is it not?
No, I think he is. And I think that's a big thing for Jeremy Pruitt. And Jeremy Pruitt understands recruiting. He understands the message. Not only that, but Jeremy Pruitt understands what Tennessee football was at its height. I think that's really the biggest thing that comes off of these videos for me is we've talked about it a ton of times. And listen, I said this the entire time when Butch Jones was the head coach. You've got to expect more out of Tennessee football. It can't be, well, we won this many games, or we did that, or we turned it around, or we were top 25. It has to be, what are we doing? We can't beat UMass by 3 points and be excited about it. And Jeremy Pruitt understands that as well as anybody because he saw Tennessee at their height.
Jamie Bailey on the YouTube comment section says, everything that Terry Fair is saying, it's all lies. There's no way he liked putting on the orange. Is there a chance that he really didn't think that was a pretty color?
No, you don't. Yeah, listen, when you have opportunity like that, you don't. I don't think so.
Matt Murrell on the YouTube comment section, much the same way, says, ooh, how can you like orange? Friends don't let friends wear orange. I think this is one of those things where if you're not a Tennessee fan, that big sort of, traffic cone shade of orange, you think it's the ugliest thing you've ever seen. But if you're a Tennessee fan, let me tell you something. It's the prettiest color that's ever been painted.
I used to tell you this all the time. The orange, it seemed like every year it was like Bama was up against somebody in orange. I mean, it was Florida, Auburn, the Tennessee, even the Clemsons here recently. It's like orange comes out of all these corners, man. I'm not a huge fan of it. I won't lie to you.
There is a lot of orange out there. There's no doubt about that. All right, item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. One of the players that Georgia's certainly hoping to get a contribution from in his freshman season 2018 is Zamir White, the 5-star running back, nation's #1 player at his position for the class of 2018. There's only one problem with that. White suffered an ACL tear near the end of his senior season there in Laurinburg, North Carolina. However, there is some evidence that suggests he could be on his way to a full recovery. I'm not sure what this means, but I like the video. Let me show you a bit of Zamir White here going through some martial arts at the Georgia football facility here. Now watch this kick. You're about to see a spin kick. Watch this. Boom! Oh. How about that? Ralph Macchio style.
Man, I got
kind of working with the fists of fury here.
Yeah.
How much does that impress you?
No, it impressed me, but it brings back a lot of memories. This is
spin.
This is something. Listen, we used to do Taekwondo at Bama and Pilates and all that stuff. It just it brings back a lot of memories.
I mean, first of all, he knocks the guy back, and then comes the side kick. Boom!
That guy's like
That guy's just going for
pounds.
a ride. Still.
It's impressive.
Why you gotta hate on the guy with the hurt knee?
Boy, he crushed that guy. He's like 150 pounds.
I wish I could get my leg up that high.
I used to be able to, man. The hamstrings are not going to do that anymore.
So that settles it. He's healthy and playing, right?
Yeah. He's rushing for 1,000 yards too, and Georgia wins the national.
This is what Nick Chubb did to recover from his injury.
Listen, I think it's great. I think anytime
is it Taekwondo, is what that's called?
that might be jiu-jitsu. I'm not sure. Listen,
would you know the
I don't know the difference. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. But it's good news nonetheless, I think, for sure, for Georgia.
I mean, it's got to be good on your knees, right?
Yeah. I don't think anything going on that turf field right now is good for anybody's knees, but I think it's a good sign moving forward, though, as far as him being healthy and athletic and doing all those things.
We shall certainly see about that. All right. Here in SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life. And today, unfortunately, I am somewhat the subject of this champion of life. A viewer to our program on Tuesday spotted me. Now, I'm not quite sure what I was trying to do here, but somehow the words go totally awry. We were talking about the Alabama kid, Jason Jones, who committed to Alabama but sort of trolled Georgia in his announcement. The point that I was trying to make was that maybe he was showing that Alabama's still a little worried about Georgia, but in the midst of trying to sort of poke at Mike about this, I may have gotten a little too high pitched with my answer here. Some of you seem to enjoy this, so let's make this the champion of life. First of all, let me show you the tweet from the person who sent it to us.
Oh.
This is Pat Brown here who sent it to us. That he gave us the perfect clip to use from now on. So he sort of wants to turn this into a GIF of me saying what I said. So, okay, so we don't have the video on that. We'll make sure, Mike tweeted it out from his Twitter account earlier. You can go check that out from him there. You can check that out. It's pretty funny stuff. I appreciate Pat Brown, who's a faithful viewer to our program, for sending that in. And if you're a person that'd like to see that, Mike's got that on his Twitter feed. I'll try to retweet it from my Twitter account here too, although I will admit I'm a little bit behind on my Twitter mentions as of late. For now, though, we're going to wrap up today's program and remind you that the podcast will be up right after things are done. For those of you that like listening to the show, we certainly appreciate that, and certainly appreciate you checking in, no matter which sort of podcast outlet's the best way for you to go, the Apple devices, the Google devices, however you like to go on the Android side of things. We just appreciate you listening to SEC Country Live each and every day. For those of you that watch the show, thanks for sharing the show with your friends on YouTube and on Facebook and kind of everywhere else. We will be back here again on Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of SEC Country Live. We'll see you then. Hope you have a great day.